verses 1 through 17. The book of the generation of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Abraham begat Isaac, and Isaac begat Jacob. And Jacob begat Judah and his brethren. And Judas begat Phares and Zerah and of Tamar. And Phares begat Ezram, and Ezram begat Aram. And Aram begat Amminadab, and Amminadab begat Naason. And Naason begat Salmon, and Salmon begat Boaz of Rahab. And Boaz begat Obed of Ruth, and Obed begat Jesse. Jesse begat David the king, and David the king begat Solomon of her that had been wife of Uriah. I'm going to stop there, and we're going to talk for a minute. Let's read it. Let's read it all. And Solomon begat Rehoboam, and Rehoboam begat Abiah, and Abiah begat Asa, and Asa begat Josaphat. Josaphat begat Joram, and Joram begat Ozias, and Ozias begat Jotham, and Jotham begat Ahaz, and Ahaz begat Ezekias, and Ezekias begat Manasseh, and Manasseh begat Ammon, and Ammon begat Josiah, and Josiah begat Jeconiah and his brethren about the time they were carried away to Babylon. And after they were brought to Babylon, Jeconiah begat Salathiel, and Salathiel begat Zerubbabel, and Zerubbabel begat Abiud, and Abiud begat Eliakim, and Eliakim begat Azor, and Azor begat Sadok, and Sadok begat Achim, and Achim begat Eliud, and Eliud begat Eleazar, and Eleazar begat Mathan, and Mathan begat Jacob, and Jacob begat Joseph, the husband of Mary, of whom was born Jesus, who is called Christ. So all the generations from Abraham to David are 14 generations. And from David unto the carrying away into Babylon are 14 generations. And from the carrying away into Babylon unto Christ are 14 generations. Okay. I got my new Bible, and it glitched on me already. It jumped to 1 Corinthians. Some years ago, actually the turn of this century, there was a movie came out called The Da Vinci Code, and everybody was just fascinated by the Da Vinci Code. And we're not going to talk about the Da Vinci Code tonight. I just use that as an introduction. Tonight we're going to talk about the Christmas Code. Matthew's genealogy of Jesus Christ has a wonderful story in it for all of us. I saw a thing on Facebook here a while back, and it said something to the effect, there's only been one Christmas, the rest have been anniversaries. Being a Baptist, I don't even recognize Christ Mass, much less having celebrated one. But I do acknowledge the importance of this season, this holiday that we've set aside to remind us of the Lord's birth. And so in looking at this, Matthew reminds us that the Christmas story, that is the birth of the Savior, did not begin in a manger in Bethlehem on December the 25th. The Christmas story actually begins in Genesis chapter 3 and verse 15, when God said, I will put enmity between thee and the woman, and between thy seed and her seed, and it shall bruise thy head, and thou shalt bruise his heel. The Christmas story is then carried forth in God's calling of a Gentile to leave his people and become a people of his own, that being Abraham. So Matthew starts with Abraham, the book of the generations of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Abraham begat Isaac, Isaac begat Jacob, and Jacob begat Judas and his brethren. And Judas begat Phares and Zerah of Tamar, and Phares begat Esrom, and Esrom begat Aram, and Aram begat Amminadab, and Amminadab begat Naason, and Naason begat Solomon, and Solomon begat Boaz of Rahab, and Boaz begat Obed of Ruth, and Obed begat Jesse, and Jesse begat David the king, and David the king begat Solomon of her that had been the wife of Uriah. We need to remember that this genealogy that's written in Matthew is no ordinary genealogy like what you would find in a family Bible, but rather this is proof that Jesus is the rightful heir to the throne of David, king of Israel. It tells us that Jesus shall one day rule on David's throne. And this story is telling Israel, saying, remember what God promised so long ago. Well, now he's fulfilled this promise, the promise of Genesis 3:15. God has given you a Savior, and by him you have new life. Now, likewise, the names that are given in this genealogy or this story show an unbroken line in accord with God's purpose. And in this, we find three groups of names. The first is for women in what is a male-dominated list. They are Tamar, Rahab, Ruth, and Bathsheba. Tamar is the first, and she does something that is unthinkable in her time. As a matter of fact, it's pretty much unthinkable in our time. And I'm going to rip these pages apart here in a minute. I'm all thumbs. She devised a plan to bear a son by her own father-in-law. We read in Genesis chapter 38, verse 13, and it was told Tamar, saying, behold, thy father-in-law goeth up to Timnath to shear his sheep. And she put her widow's garment off from her, and covered her with a veil, and wrapped herself, and sat in an open place, which is by the way to Timnath. For she saw that Shelah was grown, and she was not given unto him to wife. When Judah saw her, he thought her to be a harlot, because she had covered her face. And he turned in unto her by the way, and said, go to, I pray thee, let me come in unto thee. For he knew not that she was his daughter-in-law. And she said, what wilt thou give me, that thou mayest come in unto me? Well, to make a long story short, I know it's done too late. In short, according to the law, the father-in-law, Judah, was to, in the case of the death of her husband, before they had an heir, to provide another husband of the family. When Tamar's first husband died, Judah gave her a second, But he refused to provide, the second one refused to provide her with an heir. And so then Judah, when Shelah was born and grown, refused to give her, to provide her with a third. And the idea of having a male heir was important then, and particularly it's important to Matthew's story, because this would have left Judah with no grandchildren, and God promised that the scepter would not depart from Judah until Shiloh come. Genesis 49:10, if you want to flip over and read that. But what Tamar did was unthinkable. But according to Matthew, her refusal to let her father-in-law shirk his duty kept the messianic promise alive. A promise that would centuries later be fulfilled in the manger in Bethlehem. The next is Rahab. Rahab, unlike, you'll remember these women, I'm sure, but unlike Tamar, who was a prostitute in disguise, she wore no disguise. This was her profession. And she also ran a boarding house in which the Israeli spies hid while spying out Jericho. She was not what you would call, what normally would call a heroine. She is a foreigner, number one. She's a tainted woman, number two. And she's a traitor to her own people, number three. But through her courage, she helped promote the promise to another generation. Think of this. Without Rahab, the harlot, there'd be no Christ and no Christmas. Real early, but it wasn't early enough, I guess. Then there's Ruth. Ruth is a Moabite, descendant of Lot. And as Paul put it to us, about us, she was alien from the commonwealth of Israel, and a stranger to the promises, Ephesians 2:12. And yet, by her devotion to an alien Jew, Naomi, and Naomi's God, the God of the Hebrews, she became the grandmother of King David, the one who truly begins to define the Christmas story. Now, once again, without Ruth, there's no Christ, no Christmas. You say this is a strange Christmas message? Well, not for a New Testament church. Finally, there's Bathsheba. You all know her story, how David forced her, gets her pregnant, and then kills her husband. 1 Kings chapter 1. And then in chapter 1, verse 5, it says, Adonijah, son of Haggith, exalted himself, saying, I will be king. And he prepared him chariots and horsemen, and 50 men to run before him. But by Bathsheba's courage, God's pure line was saved. Now understand me. God could use anyone. He could have done this any way he wanted to. But this is how he wanted to. And so then God used these women. And before we leave this portion about the women, I want us to look at something of the men. Abraham, where it all began. Twice, on 2 different occasions, he convinced his wife to tell a monarch they were not married. Tell him you're my sister. God had to intervene in one instance in order to keep his promise. And then Jacob. Jacob twice plotted against his brother Esau to take away his birthright. And David, who plotted, connived, and committed murder to get what he wanted. So, Matthew is telling us in more or less a code that the promises of God of new life, salvation, and forgiveness through his Son is sure. It came to us through all too human hands, which held the visions of his promise sure. It tells us those in the spotlight are just as frail as we are. I hope you see where we're going now. It tells us that if these can make the list, then you as children of God are a vital part of the Christmas story, the story of a Savior. Verse 7. Solomon begat Rehoboam, and Rehoboam begat Abiah, and Abiah begat Asa, and Asa begat Josaphat, and Josaphat begat Joram, and Joram begat Ozias, and Ozias begat Jotham, and Jotham begat Achaz, and Achaz begat Ezekias, and Ezekias begat Manasseh, and Manasseh begat Ammon, and Ammon begat Josias, and Josias begat Jeconiah and his brethren, about the time they were carried away to Babylon. This second group of names contains important people, kings, prophets, men such as Rehoboam and Asa and Jehoshaphat, leaders of the nation of Israel. Some of them were good kings, some of them were not so good. And yet, this second set of names begins with Solomon and ends with Jeconiah in Babylon. Whatever else this second set of names gives us, and might mean to us, it means that the promise of God is held in nations and in groups of people. Such as the nation of Israel and the local New Testament church. the history of Christmas is to be born by us. The story of Christmas is to be born by us. The Christmas story, the birth of the Savior, is not just about a baby in a manger. The promise of Christ, which was born at Christmas, is to be carried by all of us, whether we be kings and monarchs, or whether we be a New Testament church. You know, it used to be said when I was younger that the call to preach was the highest calling of all, more important than even the president. We've kind of lost that for some reason. We need to understand how important on this Christmas season, we need to realize again how important the New Testament church is to the Christmas story. Though we may feel plain and ordinary, we see all those before us were too. Now, without you, those of you who constitute Brookside Missionary Baptist Church, might I say, Brookside New Testament Church. The Christmas story's finished. In verse 12, and after they were brought to Babylon, Jeconiah begat Salathiel, and Salathiel begat Zerubbabel, and Zerubbabel begat Abiud, and Abiud begat Eliakim, and Eliakim begat Azor, and Azor begat Sadok, and Sadok begat Achim, and Achim begat Eliud, and Eliud begat Eleazar, and Eleazar begat Mathan, and Mathan begat Jacob, and Jacob begat Joseph, the husband of Mary, of whom was born Jesus, who is called Christ. So all the generations from Abraham to David are 14 generations. And from David unto the carrying away unto Babylon are 14 generations. And from the carrying away into Babylon unto Christ are 14 generations. Now what's unique about this list is Abiud, Eliakim, Azor, Zadok, Achim, Eliud, Eleazar, Mathan are named nowhere else in the Bible. Others in the genealogy we find in other places. But these men, their moment of fame is Matthew's genealogy of Christ. They were, well, we call it nobodies. But nobodies in God's service are somebody. I hope I'm not boring you, because I'm trying my very best to encourage you. And either next Wednesday night on the 31st or on the first Sunday of the new year, I got another message to encourage you. All the other names Matthew gives us can be found somewhere else in the Bible, but not these. They're just plain old. They are anonymous. They are nobodies. They are the ones in the background that don't get written about. They are the day-to-day messengers that carry the story of Christmas to a lost and dying world. You never hear their story, but their story is important to the story of Christmas because they are the ones carrying the message forward. I have a list that goes something like this. Bill Bailey, Marcella Kinder, Gus Swan, Glenn Hamilton, Robbie Horn. Most of you know Glenn Hamilton. Some of you possibly know Robbie Horn. But Bill Bailey and Marcella Kinder and Gus Swan don't mean anything to you. They do to me. Marcella Kinder was a Sunday school teacher at Messler Missionary Baptist Church who put up with me and 4 or 5 others just like me so that we could hear the Christmas message. Bill Bailey, even though I don't know what he was preaching the day I was saved at Messner Missionary Baptist Church, which is nothing but a cornfield now. Gus Swan was a deacon at Messler Church. And one of my fondest memories was every Sunday morning he was out there in the, if you could call it a foyer, it was probably a 8x8 square. He was out there pulling the rope, ringing the church bell, calling everybody to service. Glenn Hamilton, I always called him my pastor because he was my pastor when I surrendered to preach. He was the first to influence me to go the language route at the seminary. His words were, learn the language, you'll get the theology as a bonus. Learn the language. Robbie Horn. I'm reminiscing now for just a moment. When I moved to Arkansas to go to seminary, we were at Crossroads Baptist Church, Missionary Baptist Church, and Jesse Shepard was the pastor. And I love Jesse Shepard. But he lectured just about like I am tonight. And it just made you want to go. I thought that's what I was beginning to think that's all there was. And then Brother Jesse resigned. Robbie Horn come along. And he got up there and preached and beat on the pulpit and screamed and slung snot. And well, maybe there is another way. But to you, these are all still anonymous. These are preachers, Sunday school teachers, Christian friends who had a part in bringing me to where I am now. Each of us hears a story from someone who got it from someone who got it from someone. And this is the great truth of beget. Thanks to the witnesses of the one before, the promise came down to us. Now, the torch is passed to you. Will you carry it to a lost and dying world, or will you hide its flame under a bushel? The Christmas story begins in the Garden of Eden, and it passes on to a Gentile named Abraham. And it moves incredibly through impostors, traitors, connivers, and pretenders. It has come through kings and slaves, aliens to the commonwealth of Israel, and churches just like this one. It's been born by the John Does and the Jane Does of this world, that you might have this word today. That's the Christmas story. Won't you do your part to carry it forth in the coming years? The torch is passed to you. Let's stand to be dismissed.